Hi there, this is Jen, and thanks so much for stopping by today. Today I'm creating a card using some visible image products, and I'm going to be doing some fun techniques that I either haven't done in a while or maybe I haven't done them at all. To start out, I am going to be using the main stamp set that I'm going to be using. It's called Sketched Tulips, and this is one of the latest releases from Visible Image, and this one is called Transmission Glitch, which is also a part of a new release. And I use only the small little kind of number stamp on that set. I'm going to be using some Distress Oxides. This first one I'm using is Salvaged Patina. And so I'm just going to take my blending brush. I am using a piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock, and this is cut to 5 by 7. Originally, I wanted to do a bigger card, and I ended up kind of changing that a little bit. So I'm just going to blend out that first color. I flip the card around because I like to blend into the color instead of away from the color. So whenever I'm blending two colors together or blending several colors like this, I always like to go towards the previous color. I think it's easier to blend and you get a nicer blend that way instead of trying to go away from the color. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead and blend the Twisted Citron, and then I'll also go in with my Salvaged Patina and smooth that line out a little bit. And then I'm going to use some Abandoned Coral. I started out with the Ripe Persimmon and I thought it might be a little bit too orange, and so I'm going to go ahead and use the Abandoned Coral, and I'm going to blend that card as well. So I'm just basically going to follow the same path that I followed for the other two colors, and that is to blend the color until the cardstock is covered, and then I will go back in with the blending brush for the previous color and blend those together to get that nice even blend of colors. And then I'm going to take my water bottle and spritz that with a little bit of water. And since these are lighter colors, generally the water splotches don't show up as well as they do on the darker colors, but there are a few little water splatters that you can see there. And then I'm going to take the Sketch Tulip and put that in my MISTI. And I usually don't use my embossing bag when I'm using clear embossing powder, but it does still stick, and so I wanted to make sure that none of that extra embossing powder stuck onto my cardstock, and so I did prep that with the embossing bag. And then I'm going to take the Versafine Nocturne and ink that up, and I actually inked that up probably about 2 times, and then I'm going to cover that with some clear embossing powder. So I'll just cover that image and tap off the excess. And then I'm going to take my heat tool and apply the heat, and that's going to melt those tiny little plastic particles that are what an embossing powder is made up of. And so it just gives this really vibrant, bold black. And then I'm going to start stamping with some white acrylic paint. So I just put a little bit of that on my craft mat, and the stamp that I'm going to be using for this is from the Tulips set, and it's the Scripty Words. I'm just going to tap that in the paint and then tap it off a few times so that it's not too unclear, I guess. So if you tap a little bit of that ink off, you get a clearer stamp than you do. As you can see, if that first impression that I got, the paint is kind of blob. It's like a blob of paint in an area. So if you tap it off a little bit, you'll get a clear print or stamp of the actual image. So I'm going to do that a few times around the cards. And then from the Transmission Glitch set, I'm going to use those little numbers, and I'm going to put those right in the middle of that tulip. So I'll stamp that as well. And then I decided here that I didn't want to have to fill up all this extra space, and it was a lot of blank space, and I didn't really like that. So what I ended up doing was, and I'm sorry I didn't take the measurements on this, but what I ended up doing was cutting that panel so that it's just going to be a strip, and I'm still going to mount this on a 5 by 7 card base, but it's just going to sit in the middle of the card instead of taking up the entire card. And then the other thing that I tried was taking some water and spraying the stamp and then kind of shaking off any excess water and then stamping with water. And it's basically, I can't think of what the technique is called, but it's basically almost like bleaching your paper. And so it's going to have a really faint impression of that stamp where the water has hit the paper and removed the ink that was sitting there, because this is a water reactive ink. So it's just gives this really faint, beautiful pattern in the back. And so I'm going to go ahead and stamp that around several times. And then I'm also going to take the small little tulip stamp and stamp that one up as well, just to see how well that's stamped up. And so I'm going to do that here. And again, I'm just spritzing the stamp with water a few times until it's wet. You don't want it dripping wet. And then I'm taking it and I'm just kind of just shaking it in the air to get any excess water off. And then I'm just pressing it down and holding it for about 10 to 15 seconds to make sure that it allows it time enough to get that faint image on there. And then I let this dry, and I mounted it on a piece of off-white cardstock. It's very small trim around each side, and then I did mount that onto a 5x7 piece of white cardstock. And then the sentiment I'm using for this is from the Affirmations stamp set. I love the stamp set because I love the type font of all of the sentiments that are in the set. So I'm going to stamp that up with some Nocturne, and I'm going to cover that with some Clair embossing powder and heat set that. And then I'm just going to trim off the excess. And with that little extra piece of paper that I had cut off of the main background, I adhered that to that little piece of paper. And I'm just going to add that to the card. And I thought about adding some sequins or some white splatter, and then I was like, no, I'm just going to stop here. And so I did stop. And I think it's a very clean and simple, pretty card. I love these colors together. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did like this video or find it informative, please go ahead and give a thumbs up. As always, I thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to spend with me, and I hope to see you next time.